Welcome to another recording in the series that Anchor and I have been composing in the OTT Red Creator Economy. Today, I'm gifted to introduce Keith Benders, the spectrum of credible and valuable individuals that we've been interviewing that we hope will give us content to shed light on what the constitution of the creator economy is. I'm working with across the course of this week, who is a published author with reference to the academic and scientific side of exactly what the creator economy constitutes. So today we'll be exploring some of the experience that Keith has got in North America, personally and professionally, explore what the creator economy represents in a commercial sense to organizations, and with an accent particularly on the small to medium sized organizations. Keith, welcome to this episode in the OTT Red Creator Economy Week.
Hi all.
Thanks for having me. Excited to dive in.
So Keith, for those of you that don't know you, I'd like you to do a quick introduction to yourself, because I've obviously been researching you. I said to you earlier, you probably feel a bit stalked over the course of the last week or so. I'm really looking forward to speaking to you and exploring, your experiences and what the creator economy represents to you. But set the stage for people just so that they've got a familiarity with you and the angle that you're coming at this from. Who's Keith Benders? You were born, now we're sitting in this virtual studio. What happened?
I don't want to go back too far, but I guess a lot of my professional upbringing was on the brand side. So I worked at Unilever for a long time, which is obviously a very large multi-brand CPG company. My background was actually originally in finance and economics. What I studied, did a little investment banking, but a brand marketer at heart. So went to the brand side. Unilever, now it's common, but at the time, Unilever had a ventures arm, which invested in certain groups. And one of the companies we were actually prospecting for potential investment, I then went to that company. And a lot of that company was development, but also consulting within the brand space. And back in 17, 18, the number of requests I was getting for breaking down the creator economy, the influencer marketing space, what it was, who the players are, how brands should be investing in this space, it became very obvious that this was the future of marketing and where all the dollars would go. So wisely, I then took my own trip down a discovery lane, and I spoke to a bunch of the companies in the space, fell in love with Linqia, which is one of the larger players in North America, met the founders, fell in love with the founders, and joined back in 2019. So it's been about 5 years. I run strategy and marketing at the company. And, as you know, that's led to me co-hosting a podcast that's large in the creator economy. I speak around the country on the topic. I write for Forbes on the subject of the creator economy. So as the profile of this industry has risen, so has the desire for people to learn a lot more about it. So I spend most of my time these days probably just educating the industry on what it is, where it's going, how brands should invest.
Amazing. You're going to be an amazing guest for this then, Keith. I'm really looking forward to the next 20 minutes or so, because everything that you've just said, not only the super brands that you mentioned, but the journey towards how you've become part of the fabric of those brands means that I'm sure whatever you've got to share is going to be really, really valuable to people. Anchor, should we start off with the kind of model that you've got within the book that Penguin Random House will release with you as the author in early 2025? I feel as I'm sitting here with two professors, academics, when it comes to the topic of the creator economy. So let's get straight into it from that perspective. Where would you like to start, Anchor? Because to me, the 5 C's model is always a great jump off point in these conversations.
Sure. There's so much to dive into with Keith on this podcast, Chris. How many hours do we have for this? All right. So, to start with, Keith, as we were talking about earlier, I'm publishing this book, which is coming out early next year, which talks about, at a very high level, about what the creator economy is. You remember what you said a little while back about there's so much of interest about people wanting to understand from the sidelines on, how does this look inside? And the book does exactly that. It tries to simplify the creator economy. And within that simplification process, I've come up with a concept called the 5C concept, which basically talks about all the different components of the creator economy, starting with the creator. Then it talks about the collaborators or the brands. Then the channels or the platforms. The commerce piece comes in as a 4th C, which is basically all monetization other than ad revenues. So newsletters, podcasts, things like that. And then the fifth C is the consumer / the community. So these are the 5 C's as we talk about, and all of these C's kind of interact and transact with each other, and we dive into that in the book. For the podcast today, I was hoping that if we can actually dive a little bit more into the collaborator side, which is one of the C's that we spoke about, which is the brand side. And since you mentioned that you have had a brand pedigree in the past, you've worked with the brands in the starting of your career and continue to do so, I would love to kind of put your thoughts on how the brands interface with the creator economy. And again, there are two parts to it. If you look at it and this is something that I talk about in the book as well, but if you talk about the x-axis and the y-axis, and if you put the brands on the vertical axis, which is starting from the emerging brands to the power brands, and if you put the creators on the horizontal axis, which is starting from, let's say, the emerging creators to the mega creators, in that 2 by 2 that we see over here, the big creators and the big brands, they really know what they're doing to a large extent. It is the other 3 quadrants which are kind of struggling, but most of them my interest is in the small businesses and the small creators. How do they and how should they really work in this creator economy together? Then there is obviously the aspect of the small creators and the big brands. For the big brands, it's easy to find the smaller creators, but how can a small creator start to or even aspire to work with a Nike or a big brand like Coca-Cola? How can a small creator bridge that gap? And finally, how can a small brand or an emerging, let's say, a mom and pop store tomorrow, how can they start working with the creators, the big creators? How can they start working with the influencers in the creator economy? And I'm using these two terms interchangeably because I've also mentioned that in the book, and I've quoted you over there, is the difference that you brought out between the creator and the influencers is very, very interesting. So maybe if you can touch upon that as well, that'll be great. I know it's a loaded question, but
I was
leave it
going
out
to
to
say,
you.
let's break that down, right? Because as I'd said, you two are the professors in the room. Most people will probably be students like me. The first quadrant that you spoke about there, Anchor, is interesting to me. Let's focus on that one, Keith. The smaller creators and the smaller businesses. What's your take on the posture that those guys should have with this?
So, yeah, it's a good question. If you have to kind of get into the mind of a brand of why do this at all. And I think too many creators, frankly, aren't thinking that way. And I think you have to think, why are they doing this? I think there's a few things. One is at the highest of levels, a brand's goal today in this day and age is to be relevant. It's to be relevant. They want to be relevant. And that means being part of culture. It's not like it was years and years ago where you have these tentpole moments and that's it. You just show up and you have to be part of everyday culture. Culture is driven by social media. So all of the brands now, whether you're big or small, their mindset is how do I win on social? How do I be social first? The reason why that's so hard is kind of 2 core reasons. Maybe you could argue 3. One is you need so much content as a brand these days to pump through your social, and they are not used to that or equipped to do that or funded to do that in a professional production manner. So that's one really big challenge. A second challenge is their following is never that great. Whether you have 10,000 followers or 10 million followers as a brand, you are always looking for reach that isn't your own. And then you could argue the third is really the media side of social media, which is I want my ads to do better. I always want the content to work harder. The reason the creator economy has exploded so much is it's such a unique answer to those 3 things. So again, whether you're a 10,000 followed creator or a million followed creator, you have to think, what is my role to the brand? My role is either, and ideally it's both, but it's either I'm giving them reach that they really, really value and a community that they really want to reach that they can on their own, and or I'm giving them highly valuable content that they're going to go run with and they're going to go pump media behind and they're going to put it on their channels. And again, ideally you can do both, but you have to decide what are you delivering of value to the brand and then how do you value that based on what the brand's getting out of it. So as a brand, yes, these are humans, creators, they want to work with people and do great things, but these are businesses. Like at the end of the day, they either have to show reach that is new or they have to show content that is more cost efficient than traditional production methods to fill up a content pipeline for them. That's all they're thinking about. Whether you have 10,000, 15,000, 30,000, 50,000 followers, it doesn't matter as much as what reach are you giving me? Are you solving a niche problem for me? I would say 3 or 4 years ago, we did see a lot of lifestyle influencer requests. That is not really the case anymore. Maybe at the mega celebrity, they want lifestyle. But when you're working with micro influencers, you want a niche that you're winning against. You could be a nutritionist, you could be a financial expert, you could be a yogi, but you have to have some kind of niche that solves an audience group that the brand isn't going to be able to reach on their own. They don't have the expertise to reach. You both are influencers in your own right, but you have a very specific audience. If that audience isn't valuable to the brand, they're probably not going to work with you unless you create amazing content that they could use. So it's not a simple question, but I think step one is, why is a brand opening a checkbook? If I can reverse engineer that as a creator, I can unlock a lot of things.
It's interesting, Keith, because the other guests that we've had on have approached this topic from an origin of media. And in this conversation, we're approaching it from a totally separate or different origin, which is, business and brands, and the disproportionate effect that the creator economy is having on the media industry was so beautifully and eloquently articulated by Evan Shapiro, who I'm sure you might be aware of, the media cartographer, earlier this week. Lots of examples, great numbers, the numbers don't lie type situation. And I'm listening to you thinking that you could probably reel off similar tangible examples as what Evan did when we spoke to him around the effect that these influencers have been able to have on brands. One of the things that Evan spoke about was the quality of the following, not just the quantity. And he was talking about the revenue per follower. What kind of metrics do you use when you're looking at this through the lens that you do in your role?
It's a combination of a bunch of metrics. And again, it goes back to, why is the brand opening the checkbook? What is their ultimate goal? If it is reach and it is audience, then there's audience metrics. If it's content and how that content translates into media, there's media metrics. We kind of have 5 core pillars of what we're looking at when we do influencer campaigns. One is the social conversation and engagement. So those are your metrics you think of first. How many impressions, how many engagements, what's my view through rate on the content, how many clicks did we drive? I think one of the most underutilized in that set is share of voice. So if I look at the share of voice of this brand against their competitors before a campaign, during campaign, after a campaign, how did that share of voice change? Because I worked with creators, but all of that is social conversation. That's bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 is media effectiveness. We have so much data that shows when you take creator content and you put it into your media buys, your average performance goes through the roof. That's why TikTok, Meta, YouTube, they're all pressuring all of their partners on the brand side to use influencer content in their media buys. So if you're a brand and you spend, let's use even numbers, $1 million on influencer marketing in a year, you're probably spending 20, 50, maybe $100 million on total media, TV, out of home, everything. The point of influencer media effectiveness is not just how the million did, it's how much more efficient and effective did that investment make the 50 or $100 million everywhere else. So there's media effectiveness is the second bucket. The third bucket, you can call it brand/sales lift. You usually have an upper funnel or lower funnel goal. Is it brand lift or is it sales lift? And we run a lot of coordinated studies where a third party actually does a forced exposure study, has an exposed group, a control group, and they're saying, what did it do in a brand lift setting? Or even for in-store sales, you take different DMAs, regions, and you say, this one was heavied up, this one was not. How did these things perform from a POS perspective? So just a lift in either brand or sales. That's kind of bucket number 3. Bucket number 4, we call just learnings and insights. It is amazing how much you could tell a company what messaging works with different audience groups just based on influencer testing. So if you're targeting Hispanic moms, you could deliver 4 different influencer messages, one on taste, one on sustainability, one on effectiveness. And you can say this message is the best message to serve to Hispanic moms. So there's the insights and learnings. And then the 5th bucket is the most sophisticated. A lot of brands do larger MMM models, these mixed marketing models. That's through like a Newstar or Nielsen or an Ipsos. You have to plug influencer into those models so that when a CMO is looking at their dashboards every day, influencer is a line item in those dashboards. If it's not, I can tell that brand till I'm blue in the face. We drove 1 billion impressions. We got a 3% lift in our brand love study. We drove a 20x in our media effectiveness. It's tree falls in the forest type of thing. If the CMO can't see it in their dashboard, it does not matter. So we kind of say those are the 5 core things that we're measuring.
Keith,
That's
on that
brilliant.
point, just a quick one. And I know you'll have a great question to ask, but this really interests me because when we're talking about creator topics, predominantly the digital natives are more comfortable and fluent with what the creator economy is just because they were brought up with a smartphone in their hand. Mm-hmm. You just talked about CMOs that are a different demographic. What type of psychology do you usually meet from that level of clients, potential clients, when you're talking to them about propositions and offerings to do with the creator economy? Do they get it? I mean, the tree falls in the forest is a great analogy. Do they want to get it? Do they get it? What's their psychology in response to this thing?
They're increasingly getting it. 4 or 5 years ago, I think I spent a lot of time saying, what is influencer marketing? Why you should invest in it, at least at the large cap company, and actually increasingly at the SMBs, because they, if not, get it more because they're digital first. But now it's not really what is influencer marketing? Should you invest in it? They all understand that. It's how much should you invest and how do you justify that investment? So for a CMO, the challenge is still the measurement part of the equation. It's, I know how to measure other things. This is a newer vertical and channel. So until I can measure it in the same way, like those models, it's hard for me to give money. Even if I personally believe it's doing well, I need to see it in the data. I think they get that it's valuable. It's just on the industry to make sure that it's being reported on effectively. But I go back to the business impact conversations. If I'm talking to a CMO, it is that million to 100 million. It's, yes, we're going to spend 100 million. Do we want to get a lot of impressions and engagements? Sure. But again, I'm after helping your 100 million of media work significantly harder for you. And every point of CP, whatever you measure, CPM, CPA, CPC, that I can give you because the content is that much better, every earned impression you could reach because it's trending and the content's strong, that's worth 10x the investment at least. So let's focus on business impact, not just an extra influencer, an extra impression. Like, let's keep in mind what we're trying to accomplish here.
That's great. Keith, you checked upon so many different things right now. One area that I'm really curious to understand from you is how do you see different markets working in this space? Like, for example, what you spoke about is largely, let's say, bigger organizations in the US probably, or in the UK and other markets. But how do you see the evolution changing of the understanding changing in developing markets, for example, in Asian markets or Middle East markets where we are at the moment? Any experience in these markets as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's localization, of course, is all the nuances of how do you work with localized creators, how do you have local messages, all the principles about how do you solve consumer problems and stand out and stop the scroll, so to speak, is all fairly similar. I think every market's in a different. So if you think about the creator economy, this is what people also don't fully understand is the amount of types of partnerships you could have with creators. So I'll rattle off a few. Affiliate partnerships where there is no fixed payment. It's all based on conversions. It's one type of partnership. Another is what we call CGC, creator generated content. So that's kind of, I guess people call it UGC. I'd argue UGC is very different, but CGC is they're not even posting. You don't even care if they post. They're just developing content for your brand. Traditional sponsored content, which is what most influencer work is. You have ambassadorships. You have more gifting and experiences. You have all these different types of partnerships and ways of working. You have product collabs, which are getting huge, where brands literally will create product innovation in collaboration with the creator. They'll put their face on it, their name on it. It might be a limited edition product. So you have all these different types of partnerships. I'd argue the difference between North America and the rest of the world, the biggest difference is probably the commerce side. North America hasn't been as commerce centered as Asia and other markets in terms of selling through the posts. But I think there's similar kind of profiling of how brands want to work with creators and use creators. All of that, though, affiliate, gifting, product placement, it's all creator economy. So I do think you talk about future forward, that the head of partnerships or whatever this title is going to be is going to be one of the most important titles at a brand for any size company moving forward, because that is the whole business these days. That is how people find out about products. That's how they shop products. That's what inspires them. So I think for the markets, the mix is different. Some lean further into live stream shopping and affiliates. Some lean further into product placement and sponsorship. But if I was a brand, I'd be designing a system where I could have all of those things with different strategies for each, but it's all part of the funnel. Some of those are lower funnel, some are mid, some are upper funnel. I would find a way to make sure I had a team that their job was the whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle.
Keith, what you've just said there kind of fascinates me because, as an entrepreneur and the CEO of a business that's a decade old now, we're well into this. We're a well-established brand when it comes to global recruitment for streaming organizations, and, content obviously being a critical part of that. But, your perception there of the part of the planet that we're in maybe being slightly ahead when it comes to commercializing content is interesting for me, because I think the same about North America. And this is my point, is that we're in such a fluid environment. The tectonic plates of the landscape that we're on when it comes to how quickly things are crystallizing and evolving excites me. It doesn't just fascinate me, it excites me. And conversations with Anchor and the rest of our guests, and now you, Keith, really excite me, because I think what it fosters is the opportunity to get a more common understanding of where things are and calibrate what the art of the possible is going forward. A lot of the things you've mentioned really interest me. Anchor, I know one of the things in your book, from being one of the lucky few to see the kind of proof copies, is your 3-point model around relevance, recency, and forgive me, there's a third point to that.
Relatability.
Relatability. Keith just mentioned that, right, in terms of relevance, and it's the nucleus of a part of the dialogue that I think we should pick up on. Talk to us about that part of what you've developed, Anchor, because then we can start to blossom that out with Keith and his experience.
Yeah, and I think I also recently read the report. There's a relevancy report that Keith also posted about some time back. It's a beautiful report. I read that recently, which talks about the relevancy framework, and it's a fascinating read. But and stretching on to what Chris just mentioned, Keith, in the book we talk about how does some pieces of content do better than the rest of the pieces of content. And what are those key things that, at least in the short form video content that we're creating, that as creators are creating today, how does one piece of content stand apart from the other pieces of content under the same genre or something? So the framework that I've used in the book is a 3R framework, which talks about if the content piece checks boxes, these 3 boxes, which are relevancy, recency, and relatability, you are hitting some sort of a sweet spot in terms of catching your audience's eyeballs and being able to kind of leverage on in terms of numbers of views that you're getting and all. Not all of them have to be relevant, or not all of them have to be checked in at the same time. But it seems like if you have a piece of content which is recent, hasn't happened recently, is in a recent memory, is relatable to the audience, and also relevant to what I'm doing or something, it has a better chance. Now, in the relevancy framework also, I saw that within the framework there were a couple of areas which talks about how recent is that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was something about recency as well as about relevancy within the framework itself. And I found it to be very overlapping with the content piece as well. So do you think when brands talk about being relevant or trying to be relevant, do they also have to be recent, and they have to be relatable to the audiences that they're talking to?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I hadn't heard that before, that framework. I think it's an interesting one. Relevance is one of those, and that study was TikTok and Wark, and it had some Kantar data in it as well. I think if we're being honest, and as an industry, and I talk about this a lot, we haven't done the best job of measuring relevance and proving the value of relevance. And I've been really begging some of these research companies to look at some of the top growth brands run a study on relevance across brands and see, is there a correlation between the ones who are growing the fastest and the ones who have the most relevance in that moment in time. And I have to assume there's going to be high correlation, but I do want to see more data on this. But relevance is everything. I mean, I've spent a career both on marketing and sales. And when you're in sales, this is the perception that salespeople have. If you're a consumer product good for a company, for example, you sell through retailers, you sell through Amazon. I mean, in North America, primarily it's Walmart, Target, and mass markets. As a salesperson, you constantly say, why is marketing spending all this money? If you give me this money and I discount the product at shelf, I know for a fact I can drive this growth. Meanwhile, you all are like dancing around doing crazy things and you can't prove any sales off of this stuff. Just give me all the money. And that was the sales mentality. And if you've never been in marketing, you've only been in sales, I understand why you have that mentality. The thing is, the day you become irrelevant from a culture perspective, it doesn't matter how much discounting you do, you're going to run your brand into the ground. No one's going to want the product anymore. And so we haven't figured out, like, marketing, you can't just say is a cost of doing business, but it kind of is. Like, you have no brand if you're not relevant. So it's not always about, I spend $1 in marketing, can I get $2? The entire revenue of this company is based on being relevant. And if you're not relevant, there's no revenue at this company anymore. So like, we have no choice but to try to be relevant in this day and age because there's nothing else left. So I think we have to do a better job of measuring relevance. For a brand, when you're doing creator though, there's a difference between culture jacking and creating a sustainable community and content lane, right? If a lot of the brands are just culture, they're just trying to chase a trend. They're trying to be part of any conversation so that a post pops and it gets more views and it gets more engagement. And I do think that is smart to some extent. It's just not the be all end all. It's something you should be doing, but I mean, you might not know these names, like Mohawk Chevrolet is a dealership in America in a random region of this country that gained TikTok fame because they found their lane. They do the office style content out of their dealership and their personalities are hilarious and the content's amazing. And they found their lane. Duolingo, who everyone tries to like quote as the leader, it took them a while to find their lane. They did a lot of terrible posts in the beginning and they found their lane. Ryanair found their lane. You have to find your lane that gives people a reason to come back and to follow you and to engage with you ongoing. You can do that and at the same time try to chase some of these trends and get mini viral moments and to get all the views in real time. But I think there's not one or the other. I think you have to do both as a brand. Then the question is, what role do creators play? Do creators play only in the culture jacking? Do they play in the finding of the lane and the content? And I think that's every brand has to answer that question on their own. But most brands don't have the resource and the skill set to do either in-house. So the creators are the conduit for them to do it at all.
Yeah. And I think that kind of segues into the State of Influencer Marketing report that recently came up with saying that 56% of the brands will use influencer campaigns in the coming year, and generating sales will be 23% out of the influencer campaigns as an objective. What do you say about that? Because it seems like there's a large gap between generating sales, which is just 23%, versus creating content around the influencer marketing campaigns.
So one of the fastest growing pieces of the industry is that CGC that I talked about. There's a lot of brands who are just trying to partner with micro nano creators to develop content for them for their channels, because they know as algorithms mess with organic reach, it's becoming frankly less and less predictable and critical. And a brand knows I can buy impressions really cheaply. So if you could just give me content that really cuts through on social, I could bring it to 1 million, 10 million, 100 million people just through cheap media. So they're in search for creators who could just create breakthrough content, and they almost don't care about the reach. Obviously, if you're a true influencer, that's different. We just had an election in this country that many are calling the influencer election. They went on those podcasts for the audience and the reach, not for the content to buy in paid media. Like, they valued the reach. So I think you have to determine which is for you. But I just think sales is not, at least in North America right now, because it's less immediate attribution, it's really not realistic for the vast majority of brands who frankly sell sub $10 items at least the biggest spenders in marketing, for them to think that a creator is going to immediately attribute a sale in the content that they post. And so I don't think it's that brands don't want the content to be driving sales. Everyone at the end of the day is bottom line focused and it's all full funnel and we want to drive sales. I just think it's a realistic depiction of this is more about the story they're telling to convince somebody. The selling is more, I'm going to go bring that into my paid media engine and I'm going to buy lower funnel media and I'm going to connect it to my Google and I'm going to connect. Like I can do that in a paid environment at the brand. The role of the creator is not say 20% off, say buy now, say get it at the store tomorrow. It's to tell a story that drives people to have interest in this product.
That's right. So like create the awareness around or have that narrative out basically, and then drive the lower funnel with ad impressions or whichever way. From a tactical standpoint, Keith, and we spoke about, when we started the conversation, we spoke about the 2x2 matrix. I just wanted to get a little bit more tactical in terms of when it comes to small businesses and small creators. Are there any sort of tactics that you would suggest for one, the small brands or emerging brands trying to work with larger creators? How can they attract large creators? How can they start to work with them? And also from the large creators working with the small brands, like why and how should they be starting to think about that?
I think there's a time and resource horizon that every brand has to look at for themselves. I think some people think small brands have all the time in the world to go prove market fit and to sell product and that they could just slow roll their way that's not the case. Like a lot of these companies take money, they have overhead, like you don't have all the time in the world. So if I had all the time in the world, sure, I would reach out manually to as many people to do an affiliate relationship. I would send free product and try to get them to post. I would just ask them if they want to support the brand. There's no predictability or scalability around that tactic, but would I do it? Absolutely. Absolutely, I would do it. And do I even need expensive resourcing to do that? No, there's a lot of very social savvy people out there who are incredibly cost efficient that could go take on that job. But I would build that pyramid. So at the bottom of the pyramid, if you think funnel too, or build that funnel, affiliate is, can you set up a set it and forget it affiliate model? Think about TikTok Shop, think about YouTube affiliate. Can I have my product be affiliate approved and have any creator anywhere in the world at any moment take that link and go use it and try to drive sales? And sure, someone needs to send out all these messages to all these people saying, do you want to post? It's an affiliate link. You can make money, blah, blah, blah. But I try to set it and forget it and turn on the tap and let the pennies trickle in. Do I think you're going to make a business off of that? Absolutely not. But do I think you should do it and set it up to see if that could be some revenue? Yes. Step 2 is, can I shoot for the moon? Do I have a story that I could tell that I could DM a bunch of creators and say, here's my story. Aren't you passionate about it too? Let's go solve the world's problems together. Like, let's collaborate. And you might get 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100, 1 in 50, depends on the brand, that say yes. And I would have somebody doing that as well. But realistically, you are going to have to pay creators if you want them to talk about your product and promote your product. So I would have a set of creators that I pay, and some would just be for content purposes, so I could power my media engine, and some would be to reach audiences that I can't reach on my own. And I would set that up, and I would be doing all of the things. The only difference to me, if you're a big or a small brand, is how much time you have and how much money you can spend given that situation. But I mean, you'd be surprised if it's all about, and this is why to me I like the age we're living in, is your product better have some uniqueness and a story that gets anyone to even want to be a part of it. I think people think creators have rate cards. They kind of do, but the second you're doing something that is about, look at like a Tom's business model, you'd be amazed at how much a creator will charge to somebody who's working on a social responsibility initiative, or because the product is about helping others, or like there's a narrative. It's a whole different rate card than if you were selling some out of the box solution that has no emotional connection to the creator. So I'd argue you can, depending on the money you have to spend, you should have a workflow that is trying to do, I'll call it free, even though there's no such thing as free. You have resources who are managing this process for you, but I'd still do it. I still would have a budget to do this stuff. And what always gets me is, even at large companies, when they're only spending a tiny fraction of their budget on influencer, if you talk to those marketers, those CMOs, those VPs, and you say, okay, tomorrow we start a new brand together. It's called whatever, Keith's Cupcakes. We don't have that much money. You don't have your TV budgets, you don't have your radio budgets, you don't have your out-of-home budgets. What do? All of them will say creators and influencers. And that's when I usually turn around and go, then why is it 3% of your marketing budget right now? If when push comes to shove and you have to be as efficient as possible, you're saying you would do this, why are you not doing it at scale then?
Yeah, you're right. And I think a lot of times, I think if you look at the creators as businesses themselves, and if there's one business talking to another business, you're just not talking money, but you're talking about value exchange also. So, I mean, if that comes into play, I think there's a lot of things that interplay then. Sorry, Chris, you're saying.
No problem. Absolutely. Keith, we kind of need to wrap it up, but I'm almost viewing this as maybe a kind of part one of whatever we might do with each other going forward between the three of us. But it's been such an enlightening conversation. But let me ask you this as a final question. I still speak to people that I don't think I think they see the creator economy or the product of the creator engine that now exists every day, all over in their lives, through their kids and their families and, everything that they're consuming. I don't think they realize that is the creator economy. And you mentioned CMOs earlier, the psychology of them. Do you think this is ever going to go away? I mean, it's an evolving landscape, but, is the creator economy ever going to stop now, or is it here to stay in one iteration or another?
I think it's going to grow exponentially. I talk to a lot of brands, and I usually tell them, I believe that at least 80% of the content you produce in the next 5 years will be creator produced for you. Some of them are already there that I work with. Some of them are at 50%, 40%, 30%. I believe over 80% of the content you put out as a brand, and I'm talking everywhere. I'm talking about on your Amazon PDP pages. I'm talking about on your website. I'm talking about on your pamphlets. I'm talking about on your in-store signage. I'm talking about on your social pages. I'm talking about your television ads. You turn on CTV right now, you look at McDonald's commercials, you look at Old Navy commercials, they are leaving up the icons on the phone on the screen so that this is TikTok content. There's no mistaking it as anything else. It's TikTok content. So I think this content's going to take over everywhere. Where I think the big change will happen is, it's called the creator economy because it's an economy. This is why I love it so much. And as someone who studied economics and finance, there's a supply and demand problem now. There's way too much supply of creators for the demand from brands. It's the most desired job occupation for the next generation. There's not enough dollars for all of you to make a living off of this. Now, a lot of people are doing this part of the problem because they don't need to make a living off of it. It actually helps their core businesses, their personal brands, but there's too much supply. So if anything, what's going to happen is the partnerships are going to get way deeper and just fewer. You're going to see brands, and you already are, where they bring in these creators to help them with product innovation, to do product collabs, to advise on messaging roadmaps. Like, they're going to be much richer, deeper connections with creators. But that's also why, if you look at the creator economy as a whole, we've been talking about influencer marketing, which is brand partnerships. The creator economy as a whole, a lot of creators are working very hard to not be brand reliant. Do I actually think for 99% of them they ever will? Absolutely not. Brand partnerships will make up the majority of their revenue for all but the top percentage of people who can actually create new revenue streams. But they are all trying to do Substacks and Kajabis and Patreon. And they're trying to diversify their revenue streams out of just brand deals because they understand there's too much supply for too little demand. So I think we're going to have an evolution. But I think this is the primary marketing mechanism for at least the next decade. I bet many more. It just will look a little bit different than it looks today.
And that is where the commerce piece, or the fifth C, comes in, by the way, that we're talking about, beyond the brands. But
yeah,
great.
At least in North America, when the consumer behavior catches up to places like Asia from a shopping perspective, oh my God. Then the money, we talk about conversion being the biggest challenge for brand spending. Once that starts to flow up and TikTok becomes a much more attributable channel, as does YouTube, I mean, it's going to be unlimited dollars.
It's interesting just to reciprocate that point and weave some of it together, Keith. If you look at the success that TikTok have had in the B2C arena and the kind of revenue generation on that side of things through various models that you've mentioned, affiliate marketing, influencers, etc. There's an organization that a lot of people probably are not so aware of called Byte Plus that TikTok own, part of TikTok, that are actually now taking exactly the same technology that has powered TikTok over the last few years and making propositions for media companies to put into their engines, recommendation engines, personalization, etc. So the common streaming channels that we're all familiar with, interestingly, are increasingly being powered by exactly the same technology that's made that B2C part of what we consume so compelling for the last few years. It's interesting to see what the convergence is between what we would have called dying traditional media and this exponential growth in social media and what the whole stage that creates the opportunity to even have creators and influencers, and actually underneath that what the pistons in the engine of both of those industries are. Some power.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Again, years ago, we were running around the country saying, you really should try to test this influencer stuff in your paid ads, not just work with influencers. And what flipped the switch is when, I don't know, it was 2, 3 years ago, when, again, TikTok, Meta, YouTube, in every meeting with every brand, they are pounding them to do that. They're like, you have to get creator content into this paid mix if you want to do better performance. So I think that changed a lot of things. And I think the biggest trend over the next 5 years is brands understanding that creator content and social first content is no longer a social construct. This is the content people want on the streets, on their televisions. This is not it lives in social on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. This is now just the content.
A case in point is the US elections countdown.
100%.
The amount of streams. Yeah, it was brilliant
100%.
in terms of like how the online viewership was as compared to traditional viewership. Yeah, totally.
I think podcast revenue in the next 2 to 4 years is going to skyrocket because of the election. And I think whenever the midterms happen in this country and then the next presidential election, oh my God, all the money that was going to the walking on the streets and knocking on doors and traditional media outlets and the traditional models is going to go to podcasting, because everyone looked at what happened here and said that was it. This was the influencer in the podcast election.
Guys, I've loved the conversation this morning. Keith, I know that it's just gone 10 p.m. on the other side of the planet where you are. Anchor and I sitting here in different locations, but in the UAE, in Dubai, are just starting our day. But what a fantastic way to start the day. It's been an absolute pleasure. Anchor, thanks for being my co-host on this. Keith, all the best. I hope you sleep well, buddy, and I'm looking forward to future conversations. Thanks for being on this episode of the OTT Red podcast for Creator Economy Week, guys.
Didn't I tell you, Chris, that we need a few hours with Keith? The big name, he is brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much, Keith, for making the time. This has been a very, very kind of mind illuminating sort of discussion. So thank you very much for making the time so late in the day for yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope my 2 little ones let me sleep tonight.
Take care.
Bye.